We talked in an earlier video how it's, I think, a very good idea to have a board of advisors for your company. It's also a good idea to have a written agreement with those advisors. More about that in today's video. Hi, I'm Steve Morris, and I use this Startup SOS channel to provide practical how-to advice for new entrepreneurs who are building a growth company. Now, for today's topic, it's important to remind you that this is educational material. It's not legal advice. I do suggest in putting together a written agreement with your advisors, it's a very good idea to go over it with an attorney to make sure you get all of the right considerations written into the document. So I talked about in an earlier video how I think advisors are a very good thing, and a board of advisors is a very good thing for a startup. It's also, I believe, a very good idea to put your agreements with those advisors in writing. It's a great way to just avoid misunderstandings if you write it down and have both of you sign it. What might an agreement look like? Well, in the notes there is a link where you can download an example of a board of advisors agreement. Now, of course, it's just one example. There are a lot of different approaches to doing a board of advisor agreement, but at least this gives you a concrete example to take a look at, and it is based on an actual board of advisor agreement for a startup. So let's walk down the topics that are covered in the example agreement and that, typically would be covered in any agreement you'll have with your board of advisor members. One thing you'd want to cover certainly is the services you're expecting them to deliver. What is the advisor committing to, in other words? Well, hopefully there's some general advice they'll be giving just with the one-on-one meetings, maybe in-person meetings or phone calls. And you'll want a document to set expectation as to how often you might expect them to have those meetings and how long might they be. Again, set expectations so nobody gets surprised down the road. Your agreement should also cover the company duties. In other words, what the company is committing to. One thing you might want to commit to is reasonable out-of-pocket expenses that the advisor might incur on behalf of the company to, let's say, travel to a meeting of the board of advisors. Now, reasonable expenses is the key word here, key phrase. You'll want to make sure that those are reasonable expenses, and one way to do that is to simply have some wording in there about pre-approved expenses. You don't want to be surprised by a board of advisors member spending money that you didn't approve and didn't know about. You'll want to say something about scheduling. You're expecting them to perhaps meet with you in person as well as to attend board of advisors meetings. What kind of notice will you give them as to when those meetings are going to happen? Compensation is, of course, the other important thing to cover. Typically, you compensate a board of advisors member with stock options. It's reasonable to mention how many options you will recommend to the board of directors, because it is the board that has to approve options, and it will be the board that comes up with the appropriate strike price. So you don't have to document that in this agreement. That'll all be in the legal agreement that covers the actual option awarding down the road. But it's certainly not a bad idea to mention what the compensation will be in terms of the number of options that you'll at least be recommending to the board. There are a variety of other miscellaneous things you'll want to cover in the agreement. One would be just the term of the agreement. How long are they committing to be an advisor? And by the way, that term probably matches the vesting term for the options that you'll be awarding the advisor. You probably want language that makes it clear that they are not an employee and they don't have any right to employee type benefits, and they don't have any authority to commit the company. They're just an advisor. Some words about confidentiality and non-disclosure of confidential information is good to cover. And probably you want some language around conflicts of interest. Statements about things like not being an advisor to a direct competitor while they're an advisor to your company, and make it clear that soliciting employees to leave your company for another company, that would be a conflict of interest, as would be soliciting your customers to go to another company. So conflicts of interest, a very important thing to cover in your agreement. Other typical boilerplate type things you'll want to address are some information about a mailing address for each party giving notice to the other under the contract, and what governing law, what state governing law will apply to this agreement. And usually there are words about severability in these kinds of agreements, where if one part of the agreement is found to be unenforceable, it doesn't affect the enforceability of the rest of the agreement. Again, that's standard kinds of boilerplate that your lawyer will worry about getting into your agreement. And again, in the notes, you'll find a link where you can download an example of an actual Board of Advisors agreement. It'll give you a much more concrete idea of what one of these looks like. But again, I do suggest you work with an attorney to put together your own advisory agreement. So yes, I think a Board of Advisors is a great thing, an important thing for a startup to have, but it's important to put the agreement with those advisors in writing, just so you avoid misunderstandings. If this was helpful, please click the like button, share it with other entrepreneurs, and leave a note with any questions or comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that and click that notification bell, because there are always more videos coming up for entrepreneurs. And check out all of the videos in this series on building a startup team. The link to that playlist is right here. That's a wrap for this time. Thank you very much for watching.